What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Bitcoin and Markets. My name is Ansel Lindner, and on the show here, we talk about Bitcoin, but we talk about macro, we talk about geopolitics. One of the topics I've talked about a lot over the last couple of years is demographics. So we have a article here, a Substack post about demographics, and we're going to read through that. A shrinking shrinking world population, and do we know how to fix it? Can we get out of it? So that's what we're going to cover today. Let me share my screen. And first things first, check out bitcoinandmarkets.com. That's where you find all of my content. There's free weekly content, and there's free content for the podcast and all of that. There's also member content, and that is where you can support my all of my efforts, all the stuff I put out, from my podcast to my newsletters to my community to these live streams to everything. You can support me over there on bitcoinandmarkets.com. I appreciate everybody that supports and makes this show possible, makes me be able to justify spending so much time on all of the stuff that I do for Bitcoin and for my show. Next part up is going to be the price. We have a little bit of bump here. I think it's amazing. So we had this crazy low volatility before the big crash, and since then it's also been very, very flat. We are breaking up out of this range finally for the first time since back on the 18th. So we'll see if this can continue, but I'm liking that. I'm going to share this with Telegram since they don't have eyes. A lot of people are talking about this being a reverse BART, where it just goes right back up to the top here. Upside down BART haircut there. And that's possible. That's possible. We are still extremely oversold on pretty much all time frames. Let's go to the daily. Let's get rid of this arrow. Daily. I mean, it got down to some of the lowest levels. It was lower than the FTX collapse, lower than all of the collapses back in 2022. You have to go back to COVID to see a daily oversold condition as badly as we were just a couple days ago. So this is a major, major crash in Bitcoin's history. It will go down as a major crash in Bitcoin's history. And it can't continue to go down without at least a relief rally here. So if we retrace at least 50% of this, that, once we get to about 50%, we got to think, okay, is it just going to roll back over and go lower now that it has recovered a little bit? But we'll see. We'll see. We're also getting to, further down into the cycle, like I've talked about many times. So we'll see how this goes. But right now, this morning, we are pumping above the range that we've been stuck in for the last couple of days, and we will see where that goes. All right. Let's get on to the main topic, and this is a blog post or Substack, whatever, from No Opinion. Saw it on Twitter. I didn't, I forgot to copy the link to that tweet, but he is Noah Smith is on Twitter, so you can follow him. And right in line with this show. Okay, demographics is something that people don't think enough about. People don't realize how bad it's going to be. So he tries to detail out in this post how bad it's going to be. And I have differing opinions than he does. So we will get into that. All right. I think that's the lead up to all of the intro I wanted to do. So let's go into this. Humanity is going to shrink. No one has any idea how to stop the decline. So we need to prepare for the consequences. Right off the bat here on his subtitle, no one has any idea how to stop the decline. That is false. We know how to stop the decline, and I will get to that later on down the post here. The problem with population growth projections is that they naturally follow an exponential curve. When like begets like, when the number of kids is just proportional to how many people are currently alive to have kids, you get a function that either explodes to infinity or decays to zero as time goes on. So no matter what the fertility rate is, humanity is always on course for either runaway overpopulation or an empty planet. If you project far enough into the future, exponentials are inherently unstable. And that is the case. However, most of the time, like if you go back in the history of the human race, we had higher infant mortality. We didn't live nearly as long, right? I was just looking this up because I'm going to write a post for bitcoinandmarkets.com on demographics. It might be a series of these, but I was doing some research on Roman age or Roman Empire demographics, and they had such high infant mortality, and they only lived to 40 or 45. If they lived past 5 years old, then they would have a life expectancy of 45. So they lived very short, high infant mortality, high mortality rate in pregnancy itself. So the fertility rate for replacement was 6 to 9 kids. Just for replacement. This 2.1 that we hear is the 0.1 is because of the slight numbers in there where we still have some infant mortality, unfortunately, and we still have some women there do die in childbirth still. There's a few other factors in there that kids will die before the age of 5 and all that stuff, or people can just die early, say in their teens, car crash or something. And so that 2.1, the 0.1 is to replace the 2. The mortality rate still needs to have that 0.1. Well, in Roman times, it wasn't just a 0.1 extra above 2. It was 5 or 6. So no, when he says that you get a function that either explodes to infinity or decays to 0 over time, but that's not the case. That's only in a particular set of circumstances that we have today. Okay. Females couldn't have, if you maxed out the maximum amount of babies per female, you would come to something like 6 to 9, which is what the replacement rate always was. Like going back into deep prehistory and stuff. So the human animal naturally had a balance. There was no exponential nature to it. Okay. Anyway, let's continue. That said, the farther the total fertility rate gets from the replacement level of about 2.1 live births per woman, the sooner the big population changes will occur. And lots of countries that demographers had previously predicted to stabilize somewhere close to the replacement level are starting to drift towards seriously low birth rates. For example, China, with 1.4 billion people, which this is debatable. There's been a lot of different studies. This is a CCP number. This is not like a real, private number that the private market did their own research or anything. Because when the private market does do their own research, they come up with vastly lower numbers. 1 billion or fewer people in China. The two famous ones, there was a team out of Japan and a team out of Russia, I believe, that did salt studies. They studied salt intake in China, and you can know, because humans need a certain amount of salt in their diet, what the minimum and maybe maximum populations were. And I think both of those studies were under 1 billion. So we don't know what the case is in China. China accounts for 17.5% of the global population. For years, the government claimed that fertility was around 1.7. So this is CCP. The communists claimed that fertility was around 1.7, but those numbers were probably being faked. Oh, imagine that. Not only was the true number lower, but it has fallen precipitously in recent years. Right now, it is around 1.09. which is among the lowest in the world. Another thing about China is they have a massive overabundance of men versus women. It's like 11%, I believe. There's 11% more males than females of childbearing age. So not only is the fertility rate 0.9, but the actual replacement rate is above 2.1, because this is with a balanced population. The women over there in China need to be 2.2 or 2.3. And they're half of that. That means each generation will be half as big. I hope it's hard to comprehend this, but it is going to decelerate extremely rapidly. Take the US. For years, our fertility rate seemed to defy gravity, hovering at or even slightly above the replacement rate and prompting lots of triumphalist long-term projections. But much of this was due to high teen pregnancy rates and the high fertility rates of recent immigrants. Yeah, and good thing that he put in here recent, because I think it's after the first generation of being here, your fertility is under replacement, which both diminished in the 2010s. Our total fertility rate stood at 1.66 in 2021, according to the UN, though some sources have us a bit higher. And I haven't seen it this low. I think I've seen it about 1.8, 1.9, but it's still, this is drastically below replacement rate, and it's going to accelerate. It's not like these numbers get any better. They only get worse with time. The number of babies born in 2022 was 15% below the number born in 2007. Finally, there's Africa with total fertility rate of 4.3. This is still very low. Historically, that's still very low. I mean, if you go back 200 years, that would be the lowest in the world. You know, US fertility in the year 1800 was 7. I think Germany was 5 or 6, and the Low Countries were like one below that, maybe 5. So this would have been the lowest fertility in the world 200 years ago. And now it is extremely high compared to the rest of the world. And it only goes in one direction. It's only continent still above replacement, but there are some countries, I believe in Africa, that are not above replacement. They're already starting to slip. But it's headed in the same direction as everyone else. Here's a graph of Africa as a whole and the 8 most populous countries. So down on the bottom, we got South Africa, pretty much right at replacement. Then Egypt, Kenya, Ethiopia, all the way up here is the Congo. So, yeah, and everything's coming down. Some of them are coming down much faster than others. Let's see, Uganda is crashing. Kenya crashing. So Africa is well on its way as well. All right. Other sources have these countries at even lower rates, and the other sources may be right. As a recent Economist article noted, every time demographers go take careful measurements in big African countries like Nigeria, they are surprised on the downside. Africa's population is still going to rise a lot thanks to population momentum, but hopes that it would defy the general trend toward childlessness appear increasingly far-fetched. And we see this even in Central America. El Salvador, who I did a deep dive on a couple years back when they first adopted Bitcoin, their demographics were very close to replacement already. And that was a couple years ago. They're probably at replacement right now. That's how fast these things are decaying just in the last few years. The whole world is heading toward negative population growth. Immigration can help specific countries, especially the US, maintain their populations for a while at the expense of others. But as the whole world converts to small families, even that stopgap solution will become less feasible. So yes, our fertility is 1.6 in this article here. Immigration might bring that up to 2, but it's still right at replacement or just below. So the US, I mean, that gives us another 20 years. We're going to be able to watch what happens to Japan. What's going to watch what happens to Germany and China and Russia, and have an extra 20 years. I mean, that's going to be a godsend to the United States. All right, let's continue. This doesn't mean that the human race will inevitably shrink to a small, dying remnant of childless old people huddling together for one last bit of companionship as nature or our AI descendants take over the planet. That scenario is science fiction since it requires projecting very, very far into the future. But the global fertility collapse will have a big enough implications that in the short term that it's worth preparing for. Okay, but this isn't necessarily science fiction. I guess it is fiction because it hasn't occurred yet. But like Korea, South Korea's their fertility rate is at the highest 0.8. 0.8. I just read an article this morning. 96.5% of their urban areas are going to be extinct by the year 2117. And that is from the South Korean government studies. People will move out, of dying urban areas and move into more thriving urban areas. And so 96% of their urban areas will be extinct by 2117. Their population will go from 51, I believe it is, to 15 by that time. And if each generation is a quarter as big as the generation before, it's just another couple generations till you're down to single digit millions. And then what is going to happen? Those people are probably going to marry out. The economy is going to be so garbage there. People will marry out, maybe go to Japan or China or somewhere, and the South Koreans will cease to be a country. These things are exponential in the wrong way. Okay, let's talk about some effects of the low fertility future. We don't entirely have to imagine what a shrinking world will look like since some countries are already there. Japan, the oldest country in the world, half its people are over 49. Oh, its population began decreasing gently in 2010s, but more importantly, its working age population peaked in the 90s and has fallen by about 15% since then. I've been going to or living in Japan for about 20 years now, and the change is palpable. Youth culture has waned. Remember, if you guys are old enough to remember the 90s, that was it, man. Japan was like, we're all turning Japanese now. It was taking, their culture was, youth culture was booming. Haven't really heard anything about it. Has totally waned, as he says. Youth culture has waned, and the cities are choked with old people. Japanese people, already strained under an unproductive corporate culture, have to work ever longer hours to support their aging parents. Despite the country's efficient, cheap healthcare system and meager pensions, taxes have had to rise to fund both, simply because of the age ratio. Meanwhile, the ranks of corporate management are clogged with people in their 50s and 60s, making it hard for younger people with new ideas to change anything and get ahead. And this is an important part that he doesn't really get into very much. Network effects are very powerful. And I've talked about this with Bitcoin adoption. So as we get more Bitcoiners, we have more Bitcoiners having more ideas, and it builds on itself. There's an exponential nature, and people don't understand exponential numbers. I mean, it's hard to reason about them, right? And but that works the other way too. What happens when a network effect starts breaking down and you start taking people out? The effect on that network increases as you continue to go down. Another thing is separation of labor. All right. Separation of labor will start to break down. Or not, it's not separation of labor. It's what is it? Specialization. I can't remember the term now. Yeah, where you get an increasingly specialized workforce, and so you can have more people being more efficient at more things. That goes the other way. You'll have less people being less efficient at less things. You will have to do everything if you want to have a certain standard of living, and that will compound on itself. At the same time, this doesn't happen instantly, like the old people don't just go away and now you have fewer people doing fewer things. You have fewer people doing fewer things, taking care of more people that are older. It's a reverse network effect, and it will snowball very rapidly. We were talking about this on the Telegram, and who was it? Zan that brought up. He said, um, that. Oh, we were going back and forth a little bit. I'll get to that his point here in a second, but my question back to him was, how bad does the pain have to get until people accept that this is an existential crisis? It is going to be an existential crisis. And I mean, do we have to lose 50% of our population before we as humans say we need to do something drastic? How bad does it have to get before you put your narcissism in the back seat and do what's necessary of you? I sound like kind of, I don't know, authoritarian when I say that, but how much pain is humanity as a society or as a whole, as a civilization, going to go through before they change? All right, let's get back to this piece because I'm running a little bit short of time. I got about 10 minutes here. So let's just skip down. There will also probably be macroeconomic effects. Most macroeconomic models predict that as the population shrinks, the natural rate of interest goes down. The natural rate is a theoretical construct. The idea is that if the actual interest rate is above the natural interest rate, it pushes inflation down and leads to unemployment. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Basically, that the interest rates will, just like in Japan, you see the interest rates are very hard to get off zero. And they've been negative. So as your population starts aging, naturally that pushes down interest rates. So that's a problem, definitely, if you want growth, because remember, interest rates correlate with growth. The higher the interest rate means the more people can afford. The more the better the returns out there from deploying capital. If you can make 10 million off a $1 million loan, like starting a business or whatever, you make 10 million, you'll pay a very high interest rate because your profits are going to be so high. But if you don't know if you can even make back $1 million, interest rates are going to be low because no one's going to even take it out in the first place. So that's the interest rate fallacy. The less money you have, the more tight the money is, the lower the interest rate. Okay, let's keep going down here. Financially, a shrinking population means that profitable investments will be a lot harder to come by. Lower economic growth means less earnings growth, less demand for real estate, and so on. Intuitively, asset price appreciation is about transferring wealth from the young and middle-aged who buy assets to the old who sell them. If there are more old people and fewer young people, the demand for the assets of the old is going to have to be split among more sellers. And that will mean a lower price. In other words, your ability to get well off just by sticking around and getting old will be much reduced. People will have to save money more and more during their working years in order to make it to a comfortable retirement, and that retirement will be further away. Japan shows that one reliable effect of population aging is that people work longer into older age. So even 75 and older, over 10% of people 75 and older are still working in Japan. That's crazy. So in general, a shrinking world will be a world of toil. All right. Let's skip down and see how we stabilize this. Now, what I just described is just what I think will happen over the remainder of the century. Project farther enough out, and those exponential curves work their relentless magic, and things start to really get really scary for humanity. At some point, there might just not be enough young people left to support modern living standards. Of course, that's going to happen sooner rather than later. It's going to happen in, Japan could not fall that far because they have the rest of the world there, but the rest of the world is going to fall as well. So it's going to happen very, very fast. Probably in a generation, living standards are going to be tumbling lower. We already have the formula. We know we can decrease fertility by making birth control more available, increasing urbanization, and incentivizing people to stay in school longer, which delays family formation. Okay, so this is where he starts saying, how do we fix it? But this is not it, okay? Incentivizing people to stay in school longer. Saying that way you can lower fertility rate. But it's not people. It's not people. It's one particular type of person, of people, that they're incentivizing to stay in school longer. What we don't have is the latter. No one on the entire planet has ever come up with a reliable way to persuade people to have more than 2.1 kids. Countries have been trying pro-natalist policies for many years now, and we have a decently sized body of evidence on their effects. The basic story here is that at least one type of pro-natalist policy works, and possibly two. The kind that we're pretty sure is effective is having the government provide universal free childcare. This will not solve the problem. Universal free healthcare, childcare, will not solve the problem. Because women still will put off having children so that they can get ahead in their career. They can do this or that. Okay, taking the burden of childcare off of people's hands and doing it in a reliable, predictable way means that the prospect of kid doesn't mean, okay, it's that doesn't work. The policy that we're starting to realize might be effective is parental leave. Okay, blah, blah, blah. The problem here is that these policies, despite being expensive in both fiscal and labor terms, are only mildly effective in raising fertility. Okay. The grim truth appears to be that human beings just inherently don't want that many kids. What? Remember that lots of kids are accidental. Oh, people in the old days just had sex because it was fun. And kids were the inevitable, eventual result of that. No, I'm sorry, buddy. That's not true. With the advent of birth control, not just a pill, but many methods, safe abortion, and information about how to plan families, people are able to have sex without accidentally having kids. That is wrong because the major drop in fertility did not coincide with birth control. So in Japan, the major drop in fertility happened in the early 70s, and birth control was not legal there until the 90s. Also, if you look at the United States, our fertility rate dropped from like 7 to 2.5 from the Civil War to the Great Depression. And that didn't have anything to do with birth control. So, no, the birth control idea is also wrong. Okay, I'm running out of time here, so let me just cut to the chase on my solution to this. And that is what we need to have, well, the reason for the declining birth rates, in my opinion, and this is pretty well supported by the evidence out there, is that women are putting off having the first child. And why is that? Because, well, the numbers are that once you have that first child, you have the same amount of children as, say, they did in the year 1900. It's that people don't even have that first child. A third of women, say, I don't know the exact number, are childless now. And that was not at all the case. It was like 90% of women had children 100 years ago. Now it's only 70%. So women are just not having children. because they push off their fertility, or they push off their time, their marriages, their time to have babies, because they're getting their college education and they're having their careers. And then by the time that they think, okay, I'm in my late 20s, early 30s, I'm established now. Okay, let's meet a husband. Now they have this internal wiring where they are not going to settle for a man that makes less than they do. And with more women in college, there's more women in the workforce. They actually make more, like hour to hour now compared to men. So women are automatically taking out over half of the population from their possible pool of mates. So that's why when they get into their early 30s and the proverbial wall, they hit the wall and they say, well, we can't find no man. There's no good men out here. Where are all the good men? Well, they're probably making less than you, but you won't even look their way, because now you are in your career. You are making more than them. They are no good for you. So what do they want? They want the men that are their age, maybe a little bit older, that make more than them. Well, guess what? So do all women, not just the women that are 30 wanting to have a kid, but so is that woman that's 22 that wants to have a kid. And that man, naturally, by his genetics, is going to choose the younger woman because she's earlier in her fertility window. You have healthier children. The risk of pregnancy, the risk of birth defects, the risk of everything goes up as you age. So naturally, in our DNA, the men are going to choose the younger women, and the women have pushed off till they're 30. So the solution here to the demographic stuff is there has to be a major shift in feminism. There has to be a major shift in popular women's roles. Very simple thing that I heard the guy from the movie Birth Gap, his recommendation was to college degrees that are mainly women, to make them shorter, 2 years instead of 4. That gives them 2 more years to, I don't know how much that will help. But also just in schools, when girls are meeting with their guidance counselor, or when girls are talking to their teachers in 2nd grade, what do you want to be when you grow up? They should be promoting motherhood. They never do, ever. Until this the societal norms change to value mothers more than professional women, then this demographic thing is not going to change. And that could take a lot of pain. So how much pain do we need before we change these ideas around motherhood and around feminism and all that stuff? That's what we are dealing with right here. That's my opinion. And I think it's pretty well backed up by the evidence. Okay, I have about 2 minutes here, and I just want to touch on Bitcoin before I go. So let me stop sharing the screen. So with Bitcoin, this is kind of a hard thing to talk about or to connect the dots on. Why demographic collapse will actually choose Bitcoin. But it's similar to all of the deflationary arguments. So demographic collapse is going to be ultimately deflationary. You're going to have fewer people doing fewer things. Transportation costs are going to go up. You're going to have very small supply chains and all of that. So to do final settlement, you're not going to want to do final settlement with gold, because transportation costs are going to be way through the roof. Also, with decrease in globalization, which is what we're also going to see in this era of breaking down of trust, you have to instantiate the trust in the money itself, which is possible with gold, right? Gold, you don't have to trust gold. It's either gold or it's not gold, but you do have to trust somebody if it's in someone else's vault. So with Bitcoin, you don't have to trust the people. You have the Bitcoin or you don't, and you can send it electronically throughout the world. So I believe the market chooses the money, and the characteristics of a market in a demographic collapse, in a deglobalization, in a deflationary period, is going to be moving towards a less elastic money, a more counterparty risk-free money, and electronic settlement. So that is, I think the market will choose Bitcoin in all of the above. All right, so that's going to be it for today's episode, guys. Thanks for joining me. Ansel Lindner, Bitcoin and Markets. Check out bitcoinandmarkets.com, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.